The smell of rosemary and garlic filled my kitchen as I stood over the stove, my hands trembling slightly as I stirred the risotto. Not from fear, from anticipation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Through the doorway, I could see her. Miranda, wearing my silk blouse, the emerald one I'd bought in Paris 3 years ago. The one David said made my eyes look like gemstones. She lounged on my sofa, her legs crossed, sipping from my crystal wine glass while my husband rubbed her shoulders. "Hurry up with that, would you?" David called from the living room, not even bothering to look in my direction. "We're starving." I wanted to take a moment to thank each of you for joining me on this journey. If you're drawn to stories about finding your power in the darkest moments, please consider subscribing. It's free and means the world. Now, let's continue. 10 years. 10 years of marriage, and it had come to this. Me, cooking dinner for my husband and his mistress in the home I'd paid for. The home where we'd made 1,000 promises to each other, now reduced to a theater for his casual cruelty. "Coming right along," I said, my voice steady. "Practiced." I'd been practicing for 3 weeks now, ever since I'd confirmed what I'd suspected for months. 3 weeks of careful planning, quiet phone calls, and secret meetings with lawyers who specialized in what they delicately called high net worth divorces. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had no idea what high net worth meant in our case. I plated the risotto with careful precision, adding the seared scallops I'd prepared, arranging the microgreens just so. Presentation mattered tonight. Everything mattered tonight. From the kitchen drawer, I pulled out the special napkins I'd had made, folded them into perfect triangles, and placed them beside each plate. "Finally," David said as I carried the plates into the dining room. He didn't thank me. Miranda didn't even look up from her phone. Her fingers, adorned with rings I recognized from my jewelry box, flying across the screen. "This better be good," she said, setting her phone down. "I told David I didn't want to waste my Friday night on amateur cooking." I smiled, set the plates down, poured the wine I'd carefully selected from our cellar. A 2009 Bordeaux. Expensive. David loved expensive things, especially when he thought I couldn't afford them. "Oh, I think you'll find tonight very memorable," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. My table, in my house. David finally looked at me then, something flickering in his eyes. Suspicion? Maybe. But mostly contempt. That had become his default expression when looking at me over the past year. "What's with the formal setup?" he asked, gesturing at the candles, the good china, the elaborate meal. "We're not celebrating anything, aren't we?" I took a sip of my wine, savoring it. This was the last bottle I'd share with David. I thought we were celebrating honesty, transparency. Miranda laughed, a sharp sound like breaking glass. "She's trying to be mysterious. How cute." She turned to David, running her hand up his arm. "Did you tell her yet?" "Tell me what?" I asked, though I already knew. I'd known for days. David's email wasn't as secure as he thought, and my IT background had served me well. Amazing what you could discover when you knew where to look. David shifted in his seat, uncomfortable for the first time tonight. "Look, Rachel, we were going to sit you down tomorrow and talk about this like adults. Why wait?" I gestured at the table, at Miranda wearing my clothes, at the scene they'd created in my home. "We're all here now. Let's talk like adults." Miranda leaned forward, and I noticed she was also wearing my pearl earrings, the ones my grandmother had given me before she died. Rage flickered in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. Calm. I'd learned to hide my emotions well over the past year. David thought it meant I'd become weak. Defeated. He had no idea what it actually meant. Fine, David said, reaching for his wine. I want a divorce. Miranda and I are moving in together. I'm going to need you to move out by the end of the month. We've already looked at apartments in your price range. My price range, I repeated slowly. And what would that be, exactly? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. You know, he waved his hand dismissively. Something modest. You barely work anymore anyway. That freelance thing you do isn't exactly bringing in real money. I wanted to laugh. The freelance thing. My software consulting company that I'd built from nothing, that now pulled in 7 figures annually through contracts with Fortune 500 companies. The company I'd carefully hidden behind an LLC and a network of business structures that kept my name separate from the obvious wealth. When I'd met David 12 years ago, I'd already learned my lesson about men and money. My first serious relationship had ended when my then-boyfriend started treating my bank account like his personal ATM. The second had proposed within weeks of learning about my inheritance. By the time I met David, I'd perfected the art of appearing financially modest while keeping my actual assets carefully concealed. I'd told David I did freelance IT work, showed him a modest income from a small subset of my business, and let him believe he was the breadwinner. He'd loved that. Loved being the successful one, the provider, the man in charge. He'd worked in commercial real estate, made decent money, and I'd let him believe that his salary supported our lifestyle. Every expensive purchase, the house, the cars, the vacations, I'd carefully attributed to family money, lucky investments, or incredible deals. David had been happy to take credit, to let his colleagues believe he'd achieved all this through his own success. His ego had always been bigger than his curiosity. So you've thought this through, I said, cutting into my scallop. You want me out of the house. Miranda moves in. What about the house itself? Who keeps it? We'll sell it, David said confidently. Split the proceeds. Though honestly, Rachel, considering I paid for most of it, I think I should get a larger share. I nearly choked on my wine. He paid for it. The house I'd purchased outright, in cash, through a trust that had my name on every document. The house where his name appeared nowhere on the deed. That seems fair, Miranda added, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You'll need to be realistic about your financial situation going forward. Without David, you're going to struggle. Realistic, I echoed. Yes, we should all be realistic tonight. I reached under my placemat and pulled out the first envelope. Plain white, innocuous. I slid it across the table to David. What's this? He asked, not touching it. Your appetizer, I said. Open it. He picked it up warily, his fingers fumbling with the seal. I watched his face as he pulled out the contents. Watched the color drain from his cheeks. Watched confusion turn to shock, turn to something like fear. These are, he started. Divorce papers, I finished. Already filed. You wanted honesty and transparency, David. So let's start with the truth. Miranda snatched the papers from his hand, her eyes scanning the pages rapidly. These say, this can't be right. Oh, it's very right, I assured her. Those are divorce papers, filed yesterday. But that's not the interesting part. Keep reading. David's hands were shaking now. The house is in your name. Just your name. It always was, I said calmly. I purchased it 6 months before we got married. The trust my grandmother left me was quite substantial, but you never asked about the details, did you? You were happy to assume. But the cars, the furniture, He trailed off, his mind clearly racing. All mine, I confirmed, purchased through various accounts and trusts that have nothing to do with you. Check page 7. That's the asset list. Notice how short your column is compared to mine? Miranda was reading now, her face turning an interesting shade of red. This says she owns a software company, that she's worth considerably more than you, I finished. Yes, Quantum Solutions LLC. Perhaps you've heard of it? We designed the security software for your company's network, David. Ironic, isn't it? You went to work every day, bragging about your important job, using systems I created. The silence in the room was delicious. I took another bite of risotto. It really was perfectly cooked, if I did say so myself. You lied to me, David finally said, his voice strangled. I misled you, I corrected. There's a difference. I never actually lied about my income. I just never corrected your assumptions. You wanted to be the big man, the provider. I let you have that fantasy. Why? Miranda demanded, standing up now. My silk blouse looked wrinkled on her. She hadn't even steamed it. Why would you pretend to be poor? Not poor, I said. Modest. And I had my reasons. My first boyfriend emptied my checking account to buy himself a car. My second proposed 3 weeks after learning about my inheritance. By the time I met David, I'd learned to be careful. So what? David said, anger replacing his shock. You tricked me. That's fraud. My lawyer will tell you that you have no case whatsoever, I interrupted. California is a community property state, David, but community property only includes assets acquired during the marriage. Everything I owned before we married stays mine. Everything I inherited stays mine. Everything I earned through my business, which existed before we met, stays mine. Page 12 lists the very limited marital assets. Spoiler alert, it's mostly your clothes and that car I let you put in your name. I pulled out another envelope. This one was thicker. And before you try to claim you didn't know what you were signing, I should show you this. I slid the envelope to him. Our prenuptial agreement. Remember that? You signed it eagerly. Didn't even read it. Too confident. Too sure I had nothing worth protecting. David opened it with shaking hands. I'd never forget that day, the way he'd laughed and called the prenup ridiculous. What are you protecting? He'd joked. Your collection of vintage computers? If only he'd known that collection was worth $50,000. This prenup is very clear, I continued. All assets remain separate. No spousal support after the first year of separation. And look at Clause 15. Any infidelity voids any claims to marital property. Infidelity, Miranda repeated, her voice hollow. You can't prove... I pulled out my phone, tapped a few times, and turned it toward them. Security footage from our bedroom. Date stamped, crystal clear. Miranda's face went white. I had the house security upgraded 6 months ago, I said. Every room. The company that installed it? Mine. The lawyer who reviewed the legality of the footage? On retainer. The private investigator who's been documenting your affair for the past 4 months? Very thorough. David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're insane. You set this whole thing up. You let this happen just so you could... Document your betrayal? I finished. Yes. Though to be fair, I gave you plenty of chances to come clean. Remember last month when I asked if you were happy? When I suggested counseling? You laughed in my face, David. You said I was being dramatic. Because you were acting crazy, he shouted. Following me, questioning me. Gathering evidence, I corrected. For exactly this moment. Miranda was crying now, black mascara running down her face. My mascara, probably, from my bathroom. You're a monster, she sobbed, leading us on like this, letting us think. Letting you think you'd won? I asked. Letting you think you could waltz into my life, wear my clothes, sleep in my bed, and take my husband without consequences? Yes, I let you think that. For 3 weeks. I've watched you parade around like you'd conquered something. It was enlightening. I stood now, walking to the sideboard where I'd placed several more envelopes. David, you're going to sign the divorce papers. Tonight. They're incredibly generous, considering the circumstances. You get to keep your car, your clothes, your personal items, and exactly $0 in spousal support, which is more than you deserve after what you did. And if I don't? He said, trying to sound tough, but his voice shook. Then we go to court, I said simply. And I present all of this evidence, the affair, the financial deception on your part. Yes, I found the secret credit cards you opened in both our names, the forged signature on the loan application, the money you've been siphoning from your company's expense account. Should I go on? His face went from red to pale to green. You've been spying on me. I've been protecting myself, I said, which is what you should have been doing instead of assuming I was too stupid or too weak to notice what you were doing. Miranda wiped her eyes, smearing mascara across her face. He told me you were separated. He said you knew about us, that you'd agreed to. Of course he did, I said, not unkindly. And you believed him because that's what you wanted to believe. Let me guess. He told you I was boring? That I didn't understand him? That once the divorce was final, you two would finally be free to be together? She didn't answer, but her expression told me everything. Miranda, here's a truth David should have shared with you. I own this house. I own everything in it, including those clothes you're wearing and those pearls that belong to my grandmother. You have exactly 30 minutes to change and leave before I call the police and report you for theft. Theft? She gasped. David said I could. David doesn't own anything in this house, I said. He can't give permission for something that isn't his. So yes, theft. You're wearing approximately $8,000 worth of my personal property. The pearls alone are valued at $5,000. She looked at David, waiting for him to defend her, to argue, to do something. But he just stood there, deflated, staring at the divorce papers. You should go, he told her quietly. I'll call you later. You'll call me? She repeated incredulously. David, we had plans. We were going to. That was when I thought I had money, he snapped, his true nature finally showing. What exactly am I supposed to offer you now? A studio apartment and my winning personality? I watched Miranda's face as she realized what I'd known all along. David didn't love her. He'd never loved her. He'd love the fantasy of starting over, of being powerful and desired. Without money to fund that fantasy, she was useless to him. You're both pathetic, she spat, grabbing her purse, also mine, and storming toward the stairs. Leave the purse, I called after her, and the jewelry, and the clothes, everything. I'll give you one of David's old t-shirts to wear home. 20 minutes later, Miranda left my house wearing David's oversized gym shirt and her own jeans, her face bare of makeup, her confidence shattered. She didn't say goodbye to David. He didn't try to stop her. Now it was just the two of us. My husband and me. Except he wasn't really my husband anymore. In my mind, he'd stopped being that the moment I saw him kiss her in our bedroom. I need a drink, David said, heading for the bar cart. Help yourself, I said. Though technically that's mine too. The scotch, the bourbon, all of it. But I'll let you have one last glass. He poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey and downed it in one gulp. Then he turned to me, and for a moment, I saw something like the man I'd married. Vulnerable. Lost. Why did you stay? He asked quietly. If you knew about the affair, why didn't you just leave? Because leaving would have been messy, I said honestly. Emotional, public. This way, I controlled the narrative. I gathered evidence. I protected my assets. And I made sure that when this ended, It ended on my terms. So this was all calculated, he said. Every moment of the past few weeks, you were just playing a role. Weren't you? I countered. Every time you said you loved me while planning your exit, every time you kissed me goodbye while texting her, you played your role, David. I just played mine better. He slumped into the chair, looking suddenly older, defeated. What happens now? I sat across from him, the divorce papers between us. Now you sign. You take your things and you leave. You find a place to stay. I recommend not with Miranda. She's going to be very angry once she fully processes tonight. You move on with your life. And you? He asked. What do you get? I get my life back, I said simply. My home, my peace, my dignity. I get to stop pretending that your modest salary supports our lifestyle. I get to stop playing small so you could feel big. I never asked you to do that, he protested weakly. You didn't have to, I said. Your ego demanded it. Any time I accomplished something, you found a way to diminish it. Any time I mentioned my work, you changed the subject. You needed to be the successful one, so I let you believe you were. He stared at the papers for a long moment. Then, without another word, he picked up the pen I'd placed beside them and signed. Each page, every initial, his signature getting sloppier as he went. When he finished, he pushed the papers back to me. I loved you, he said. At the beginning, I really did. Maybe, I allowed. But love isn't enough when respect is missing. You stopped respecting me the moment you thought you were better than me. More successful. More important. And once the respect was gone, the love didn't matter. He nodded slowly, understanding perhaps for the first time. I'll get my things tomorrow. Tonight, I corrected. There are suitcases in the garage. Pack what you need. The rest we can arrange to have shipped wherever you end up. You really have thought of everything, he said, something like admiration in his voice. That's what happens when you underestimate people, I told him. They have time to plan while you're busy congratulating yourself. It took him 2 hours to pack. I stayed downstairs, cleaning up the dinner that had gone cold, washing the dishes, putting away the good china. By the time he came down with his suitcases, the kitchen was spotless, like none of it had ever happened. Rachel, he said from the doorway, I am sorry. For what it's worth. It's worth very little, I said honestly. But I appreciate the sentiment. He hesitated, like he wanted to say more. But what was there to say? We'd said everything that mattered, signed everything that needed signing. The rest was just empty words. Goodbye, David, I said, and I meant it as finally as it sounded. Goodbye, he echoed, and then he was gone. The door closed behind him. I heard his car start, heard the sound of tires on the driveway, heard the engine fade into the distance, and then silence. I stood in my kitchen, in my house, in the life I'd built and protected, and I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for months, maybe years. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. Papers filed and signed. It's done. Another text, this one from my best friend Caroline. How did it go? I smiled. Typing back. Perfectly. But it wasn't done. Not really, because there was still tomorrow to deal with. Tomorrow, when David would wake up in whatever hotel he'd chosen and realize the full extent of what he'd lost. Tomorrow, when he'd have to tell his colleagues, his friends, his family. Tomorrow, when the reality would truly set in. And there was still the matter of his job. His company, Berkshire Commercial Real Estate, happened to be one of my clients. They didn't know it yet, but they would soon. Because I'd been saving one final piece of information, one last card to play. I walked to my office, the room David had never been allowed to enter. Your workspace, he'd called it dismissively. Your woman cave. As if having a space of my own was something cute and insignificant rather than the command center of a multi-million-dollar business. I unlocked my computer, pulled up the files I'd been compiling. Berkshire didn't know that I owned Quantum Solutions. They knew they had a fantastic security provider, but the complex web of LLCs and holding companies kept my personal identity separate, which had made it very easy to access their systems when I needed to. I'd been monitoring David's activity for months, not just his personal email but his work correspondence, and what I'd found was interesting. Very interesting. David had been embezzling. Small amounts at first, clever enough to slip past basic audits. But over the past year, the amounts had grown. He'd been funneling money into offshore accounts, preparing for his new life with Miranda. A life he'd planned to fund with stolen money. I'd documented everything. Every transaction, every forged signature, every falsified expense report. And tomorrow, I would send it all to Berkshire's CEO, a woman named Charlotte Reeves, who had zero tolerance for fraud. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, I had earned something I hadn't had in a long time: peace. I poured myself a glass of wine, my wine, from my cellar, in my house, and walked out to the back patio. The night air was cool, the stars bright. Somewhere in the city, David was probably checking into a hotel, probably calling Miranda, probably beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistakes. I didn't feel sorry for him. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. My phone rang. Caroline, unable to wait for details. "Tell me everything," she demanded as soon as I answered. So I did. I told her about the dinner, the envelopes, the divorce papers, Miranda's tears, David's shock. I told her about the security footage and the prenup and the look on his face when he realized he had nothing. "You're my hero," Caroline said when I finished. "Seriously, you're everyone's hero. That was masterful." "It was necessary," I corrected. "And it's not over yet." "What do you mean?" I explained about the embezzlement, about what I planned to send to Berkshire tomorrow. Caroline whistled low. "He's going to lose everything," she said. "His job, his reputation, possibly his freedom if they decide to prosecute." "He already lost everything that mattered," I said. "He just didn't know it yet. This is just making sure he faces consequences for all of his choices, not just the personal ones." "Do you think he'll try to retaliate?" Caroline asked, worry creeping into her voice. "With what?" I asked. "He has no proof of anything, no leverage, no power. By tomorrow morning, he won't even have a job. No, David's done. He just doesn't know it yet." We talked for another hour, Caroline insisting on coming over with ice cream and champagne to celebrate properly. I told her tomorrow, after everything was truly finished. Tonight, I wanted to sit with this moment, to really feel it. When I finally went to bed, I didn't go to the master bedroom. That room would need to be completely redone, every trace of David and his betrayal erased. Instead, I went to the guest room, the one with the view of the garden, and I slept better than I had in months. I dreamed of my grandmother. She was sitting in her garden, the way she had when I was young, and she was smiling. "You did good, Rachel," she said in my dream. "You protected yourself. You were smart." "I learned from you," I told her. "You always said to keep something for yourself, to never give everything away." "And you listened," she said approvingly. "Not everyone does." When I woke up, sunlight was streaming through the windows. A new day. The first day of my actual life, not the pretend one I'd been living. I made coffee in my kitchen, ate breakfast at my table, and then I sat down at my computer to finish what I'd started. The email to Charlotte Reeves was already drafted. All I had to do was attach the files and hit send. I read through it one more time, making sure every detail was accurate, every piece of evidence clearly labeled. Then I sent it. 3 minutes later, my phone rang. Charlotte herself. "Rachel," she said, her voice tight. "I just received your email. We need to talk." "I'm available whenever you are," I said calmly. "My office, 1 hour." "And Rachel?" "Thank you. If this is all accurate, you may have saved this company from a much larger scandal." "It's all accurate," I assured her. "I'll see you in an hour." I dressed carefully for the meeting. Professional, polished, powerful. The real me, not the diminished version I'd shown David. As I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my blazer, I barely recognized myself. Or rather, I recognized myself for the first time in years. This was who I really was. Not David's uncertain wife. Not the woman who cooked dinner for her husband's mistress. I was Rachel Chen, founder and CEO of Quantum Solutions, successful businesswoman, and survivor of a marriage that had tried to make me small. But I wasn't small. I never had been. I'd just been careful, strategic, patient. And now, finally, that patience was paying off. I grabbed my bag, my keys, my carefully organized evidence folders, and I walked out of my house with my head high, ready for whatever came next. Because the thing about being underestimated is that people never see you coming. They never expect you to fight back, to have planned ahead, to be 3 steps ahead of them at every turn. David had thought he was so clever, so careful. He'd thought he'd gotten away with everything. He had no idea what was coming. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Charlotte Reeves's office occupied the entire top floor of the Berkshire building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the morning sun cast long shadows across her mahogany desk. She stood when I entered, her expression grave. "Rachel," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Of course," I replied, shaking her hand firmly. "This isn't the kind of thing that should wait." She gestured to the conference table where 2 other people were already seated. "This is Marcus Webb, our head of legal, and Patricia Nolan, our CFO. Given the nature of your allegations, I thought it best to have them present." I nodded, taking my seat and pulling out my tablet. "I appreciate your thoroughness. What I'm about to show you is extensive, so I've organized everything chronologically." For the next hour, I walked them through it all. Every falsified expense report, every suspicious transfer, every piece of evidence I'd gathered over months of careful documentation. I showed them the offshore accounts David had created, the forged signatures on loan applications, the systematic way he'd been siphoning money from client accounts. He was clever about it, I explained, pulling up a spreadsheet. Never enough to trigger automatic alerts, always just under the threshold that would require additional approval. But over 18 months, it adds up to just over $400,000. Patricia's face had gone pale. "400,000, she repeated. "How did our auditors miss this?" "Because he knew your systems," I said. "He helped design some of your internal controls. He knew exactly where the blind spots were." Marcus was taking rapid notes, his jaw tight. "And you discovered this how?" "Exactly?" This was the delicate part. I couldn't tell them I'd hacked into their systems without authorization, even if those systems were ones I'd helped build. "David is my husband," I said carefully. "Was my husband. We're divorcing." When I started gathering financial documents for the divorce proceedings, I noticed some irregularities. Deposits to accounts I didn't recognize, transactions that didn't match his salary. So I looked deeper. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. "You're married to David Patterson?" Charlotte asked, surprise evident in her voice. "For 10 years, I confirmed, though I filed for divorce yesterday. The papers were served last night." "That must have been difficult," Charlotte said, and I heard genuine sympathy in her voice. "It was necessary," I replied, Just like bringing this to your attention is necessary. David didn't just betray me personally. He betrayed this company and your clients. That's not something I could keep quiet about. Marcus looked up from his notes. We're going to need to verify all of this independently, you understand? But if what you're showing us is accurate, and it certainly appears to be, we'll be terminating David immediately and pursuing both civil and criminal charges. I understand, I said. I have copies of everything: bank records, email correspondence, transaction logs. It's all time-stamped and documented. Charlotte leaned back in her chair, studying me. You run Quantum Solutions, don't you? I recognized your name when you sent the email, but I couldn't place it at first. Then I checked our vendor files. My stomach tightened slightly, but I kept my expression neutral. Yes, we provide your security systems. Excellent systems, she said. Which is why I'm curious. Why didn't you come to us sooner, if you've known about this for months? Because I needed to be sure, I said honestly. And because I needed to protect myself legally. David didn't know about my company, didn't know about my assets. If I'd come to you immediately, he would have known I was investigating, and he could have destroyed evidence or fled. This way, I had time to ensure everything was documented properly. Charlotte nodded slowly. You played the long game. I protected my interests, I corrected. Just like you would have done. She smiled slightly at that. Fair enough. Patricia, Marcus, let's get our investigative team on this immediately. I want David's access revoked within the hour. Rachel, we'll need you to stay available for questions as we dig into this. Of course, I said. Whatever you need. As I gathered my things to leave, Charlotte walked me to the door. Between you and me, she said quietly, I always thought David was too smooth, too confident. Men like that usually have something to hide. Yes, I agreed. They usually do. I was halfway to the elevator when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. Rachel. David's voice strained and desperate. Rachel, what did you do? Hello, David, I said calmly, stopping in the empty hallway. I assume you've been locked out of your company email? They fired me, he shouted. Security just escorted me out of the building. They're saying I embezzled money, that I committed fraud. Rachel, you have to fix this. You have to tell them it's a mistake. But it's not a mistake, I said. You did embezzle money. Quite a lot of it, actually. $400,000 over 18 months. Silence. Then, how did you? You've been spying on me. You hacked into my accounts. I documented your crimes, I corrected. There's a difference. And honestly, David, you weren't very careful. Did you really think offshore accounts and shell companies would hide what you were doing? You got sloppy. You vindictive bitch, he hissed. You destroyed my life because I wanted a divorce? That's insane. No, I said, my voice hardening. I destroyed your ability to profit from your crimes. The divorce was just the catalyst that made me look closer. What I found? That's all on you. I'll fight this, he threatened. I'll hire lawyers. I'll tell them you fabricated evidence. You'll what, David? Spend money you don't have on lawyers who will tell you exactly what I'm telling you now? You committed fraud. There's a paper trail a mile long. Bank records don't lie. Digital timestamps don't lie. You did this to yourself. I needed that money, he said, and now he sounded defeated. Broken. Miranda and I were going to start over. I was going to pay it back eventually. I just needed to steal from your employer? I finished. That's not borrowing, David. That's theft. And the fact that you were planning to fund your affair with stolen money, that just makes it worse. Please, he said, and I'd never heard him sound so desperate. Please, Rachel. If they press charges, I'll go to prison. You can't want that. We were married. We loved each other once. Doesn't that mean anything? It did, I said softly. It meant something right up until you brought your mistress into our home and made me cook dinner for her while she wore my clothes. It meant something until you mocked me to your friends. Until you treated me like I was worthless. You killed whatever we had, David. I'm just cleaning up the mess. You're going to let me go to prison, he said hollowly. I'm going to let you face the consequences of your choices, I corrected. Just like I faced the consequences of trusting you. The difference is, I didn't break any laws. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear or regret, but from the adrenaline of finally, truly, being done. The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, watching the floors count down. By the time I reached the lobby, my phone was buzzing with another call. This time, it was Miranda. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. What do you want? I asked. You ruined everything, she screamed. David just called me. He's fired, he's broke, and it's all your fault. Actually, it's David's fault, I said. I just brought the truth to light. What David chose to do with his career, stealing from his employer, that was his decision. He loved me, she sobbed. We were going to be together. We had plans. Plans funded by embezzled money, I pointed out. Did he tell you that part? That the new life he promised you was going to be paid for with stolen funds? She went quiet. He didn't, did he? I continued. Of course not. David was very good at telling people what they wanted to hear. He told you I was boring, unsuccessful, that I didn't understand him. He told me you were just a friend, that I was being paranoid. He told his company that his expenses were legitimate. David is a very accomplished liar, Miranda. You were just the latest person to believe him. I hate you, she said. But there was no real venom in it, just exhaustion. You hate that your fantasy is over, I corrected. You thought you'd won some prize, stolen some successful man away from his dowdy wife. But there was no prize, Miranda. Just a con artist who saw you as his next mark. I'm sorry you had to learn that the hard way, but you made your choices too. You knew he was married. You came into my home. You wore my grandmother's pearls. I didn't know they were special, she said weakly. You didn't care, I replied. There's a difference. Goodbye, Miranda. I hope your next boyfriend actually owns the things he promises you. I hung up and blocked both numbers. Whatever happened to David and Miranda now was their problem, not mine. The rest of the week passed in a blur of meetings, legal consultations, and quiet satisfaction. Charlotte called me on Wednesday to inform me that their investigation had confirmed everything I'd provided. They were pressing charges. The DA's office was already building a case. I want you to know, Charlotte said, that we're grateful you came forward. If this had gone on much longer, the damage could have been catastrophic. As a token of our appreciation, we'd like to extend our contract with Quantum Solutions for another 5 years. That's very generous, I said, genuinely surprised. It's good business, she corrected. You proved yourself trustworthy and thorough. Those are rare qualities. Plus, if I'm being honest, I like the idea of a woman-owned business handling our security. Seems fitting after all this. On Friday, I met Caroline for lunch at our favorite cafe. She'd been texting me constantly all week, demanding updates, celebrating each new development like it was her own victory. You look different, she said as soon as she saw me. Good different. Lighter. I feel lighter, I admitted. Like I've been carrying around this enormous weight and I finally got to put it down. Have you heard anything more about David? I shook my head. My lawyer says his lawyer called, wanting to negotiate the divorce settlement. Apparently, David thought that if he agreed to everything, I might help him with the criminal charges. And you said? I said the divorce is already settled. He signed the papers. And the criminal charges have nothing to do with me. That's between him and the state of California. Caroline raised her glass. To justice, and to never making yourself smaller for a man's ego. I'll drink to that, I said, clinking my glass against hers. So what now? Caroline asked. You've got your house, your company, your freedom. What does Rachel Chen do with a blank slate? I'd been thinking about that all week. Honestly, I think I want to travel. I've been so focused on building the company, on managing the divorce, on just surviving. I haven't actually lived in years. I want to go to Tokyo, to Paris, to all the places I've been putting off. Alone? Caroline asked carefully. For now, I said. Maybe eventually I'll be ready to date again, but right now I just want to be by myself, to remember who I am when I'm not performing for someone else. You're going to be amazing, Caroline said confidently. You already are. That afternoon, I went home and stood in the master bedroom for the first time since David had left. The room looked the same, but it felt different. Emptier. I'd already contacted an interior designer. Everything was going to change. New paint, new furniture, new bedding. No trace of David would remain. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. David. I'm sorry. For all of it. You deserved better. I stared at the message for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it sit there unanswered. But another part, the part that still remembered loving him once, wanted to respond. Me. Yes, I did. I hope you figure out who you want to be, David. But you can't do it by taking from other people anymore. You have to actually do the work. His response came quickly. Will you ever forgive me? I thought about it. Really thought about it. Me. Maybe someday. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting or letting you back into my life. You broke something that can't be fixed. I hope you find peace with that. David. I understand. Thank you for not being cruel about this. I almost laughed. Not being cruel. As if exposing his crimes was an act of mercy. But in a way, maybe it was. I could have dragged it out. Could have made it more public. More humiliating. Instead, I'd been efficient. Clean. Precise. Me. Goodbye, David. I mean it this time. I blocked the number before he could respond. 2 months later, I was in Kyoto, watching cherry blossoms fall in an ancient temple garden. I'd spent the past weeks traveling through Japan, losing myself in the beauty of it, the otherness of it, the way it felt to be completely anonymous. No one here knew me as Rachel Chen, CEO. No one knew about the divorce, the betrayal, the revenge. I was just another tourist with a camera and a guidebook, trying to take it all in. My phone buzzed. One of the few times I'd had it on all week. A message from my lawyer. David's sentencing is today. Thought you'd want to know. 3 years, with possibility of parole after 18 months. He'll also have to pay restitution. I sat down on a stone bench, watching the blossoms swirl in the breeze. 3 years. Part of me felt satisfaction at that. Justice served. But another part felt something more complicated. Sadness. Maybe, for the waste of it all. For what he could have been if he'd made different choices. But mostly, I felt free. I typed back. Thank you for letting me know. How's everything else? Her response. Divorce is final as of yesterday. You're officially single. Congratulations. Officially single. After 10 years of marriage, countless lies, and one elaborate takedown, I was legally free. I waited to feel something dramatic. Relief, joy, sadness. Instead, I just felt quiet. Peaceful. I took a selfie with the cherry blossoms behind me and sent it to Caroline with the caption, "First day of the rest of my life." Her response was immediate. You're glowing. When are you coming home? Me. When I'm ready. Could be next month. Could be next year. I'm still figuring it out. Caroline. Take all the time you need. Just promise you'll let me throw you a divorce party when you get back. Me. Deal. But no mentions of David. This party is about me. Caroline. As it should be. Love you. Me. Love you too. I put my phone away and just sat there, breathing in the spring air, watching the blossoms fall. A group of schoolchildren ran past, laughing and chasing each other. An elderly couple walked by, hand in hand. Life continuing, as it always did. Somewhere back home, David was beginning his prison sentence. Miranda was probably working on forgetting him, or maybe still pining for the fantasy he'd sold her. Charlotte and Berkshire were recovering from the scandal, implementing new controls to prevent future fraud. And me? I was sitting in a garden in Kyoto, planning my next adventure, finally comfortable in my own skin. I thought about my grandmother again, about the lessons she'd taught me. Protect yourself. Keep something for yourself. Don't give everything away. I'd learned those lessons well. Maybe too well. I'd protected myself so thoroughly that I'd hidden myself, even from the man I'd married. But in the end, that protection had saved me. Would I do it differently if I could go back? Would I be more open with David from the start? Risk the vulnerability that honesty required? I thought about it, really considered it. And the answer was no. Because David hadn't fallen in love with me. He'd fallen in love with the idea of being the successful one, the important one. If I'd shown him my real success from the beginning, he never would have been interested. His ego couldn't have handled it, so no regrets. Not about protecting myself, not about the takedown, not about any of it. My only regret was the time I'd wasted trying to make it work, trying to be smaller so he could feel bigger. That was time I'd never get back. But I had time now. All the time in the world. I stood up, brushed the fallen petals off my jacket, and walked deeper into the garden. Around the next corner, I could hear water flowing, a stream or fountain. I followed the sound, curious. It led me to a small koi pond, perfectly still except for the occasional ripple as a fish surfaced. I sat on the edge, watching the orange and white fish glide through the clear water, and I felt something inside me settle. This was peace. Real peace. Not the forced calm I'd maintained while gathering evidence and planning my escape. This was the peace that came from knowing you'd done the right thing, protected yourself, and come out the other side intact. A woman about my age came to sit nearby, also watching the fish. After a moment, she spoke in accented English. First time in Kyoto? Yes, I said. It's beautiful. You traveling alone? She asked. Yes, I said again. And then, because it felt true in a way it never had before. And I like it that way. She smiled, understanding in her eyes. Me too. Sometimes we need to be alone to remember who we are. Exactly, I said. We sat in companionable silence for a while longer, two strangers sharing a moment of peace. Then she stood, bowed slightly, and walked away. I stayed by the pond until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. When I finally left the garden, I felt different. Newer somehow. Like I'd shed a skin I didn't even know I was wearing. Back at my hotel, I opened my laptop for the first time in days. Email from my company. Everything running smoothly without me. Message from my realtor. 3 offers on the house if I decided to sell. Note from my accountant. Investments performing well. My life. Organized and successful, and entirely mine. I drafted a new email. This one to Charlotte Reeves. Charlotte, I wanted to thank you again for how you handled everything with David. Your professionalism and discretion meant a lot. I'm traveling right now, finding myself again. But when I return, I'd love to discuss expanding our partnership. I have some ideas for enhancing your systems that I think you'll find interesting. Best, Rachel. Her response came the next morning. Rachel, I'm so glad you reached out. Take all the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready. And I'm always interested in your ideas. They haven't steered us wrong yet. Enjoy your travels. You've earned them. Charlotte. I closed the laptop and looked out my hotel window at the city below, lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere down there, people were living their lives, falling in love, getting married, getting divorced, betraying each other, forgiving each other, moving on. And I was just one of them. One person among millions, trying to figure out how to be happy, how to be whole, how to be authentically myself. The difference was, now I knew who that was. I was Rachel Chen, CEO, businesswoman, survivor, and most importantly, free. I picked up my phone and texted Caroline one more time. I think I'll stay another month, maybe 2. There's so much more to see. Her response, good, see it all. You've spent too long looking at what you thought you should want, instead of what you actually want. She was right. I had. But not anymore. I got ready for bed, setting my alarm for early morning. Tomorrow I'd take the train to Osaka, see the castle, try more street food. Next week, maybe Hiroshima. Then perhaps south to the islands. No schedule, no agenda, no performance for anyone's benefit. Just me, discovering the world and rediscovering myself. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought one last time about that dinner, about serving divorce papers as appetizers, about the look on David's face when his entire world collapsed. It had been cruel, perhaps. Calculated, definitely, but also necessary. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to burn down everything that's holding you back, even if it's your own life. Especially if it's your own life. And from the ashes, you build something new, something real, something that's entirely, authentically yours. I'd burned it all down. And now, finally, I was free to build whatever came next. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.